Asylum seekers struggle to survive as the European Union plays the blame game. Thousands remain trapped in sub-zero temperatures. Could Poland and Belarus allow hundreds to freeze to death to score political points? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the humanitarian crisis at the Poland-Belarus border. Though some may qualify as economic migrants, many people stranded at the Poland-Belarus border are fleeing war, violence, and persecution. But in their desperate search for a better future, some are paying the ultimate price.
Before noon, a forest worker informed the police about finding the corpse of a young man. After inspection, we can confirm that it is the body of a young man of Syrian nationality who was around 20 years old.
So far, at least 8 have died in the forest, but the real number could be much higher as thousands brave the elements. Right now, between 3,000 and 4,000 migrants and refugees are trapped between Belarus and Poland. Half are women and children. Temperatures at the border have dropped to -3 degrees Celsius, while food and medicine are in shorter supply. But young and old hope to survive long enough to make it to the European Union. But with Poland refusing to let them cross and aid agencies still banned from the border, most are not getting the help they need. Humanitarian workers are now pleading with the Polish government to let them in so they can assist the most vulnerable.
Apeluję do rządu Rzeczpospolitej Polskiej.
I'm calling on the Polish government to allow professional, non-governmental institutions to operate in the border zone, so that as a volunteer I would not have to leave a 5-year-old girl with her mother in the forest for the night, only because it's the best of all the bad options that are available, so that they do not go through the hell of pushbacks, so that people who are trapped with no way out will find this way out, thanks to a mechanism introduced by a large country of the European Union, Poland. This is what a strong state does.
The crisis has been escalating for months. The European Union places the blame squarely on Belarus, accusing the regime of using gangster-style tactics to fly migrants in and push them to the border. And it's all an attempt to get back at the bloc for imposing sanctions on Minsk. If President Lukashenko thought the pressure would force Brussels' hand, he was right, but not in the way he hoped. On Monday, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, confirmed the bloc will further sanction those it blames for manufacturing this migrant crisis.
Today, we are going to approve a new package of sanctions against Belarusian people responsible for what's happening in the country. And we are going to enlarge the framework in order to implement other sanctions to other people, airlines, travel agencies, and everybody involved on this illegal push of migrants in our borders.
But while EU member states and Belarus battle this out politically, a humanitarian crisis is escalating on the border of Europe, and it's getting worse by the day. The longer this standoff continues, the more refugees and migrants will continue to die. So are Minsk and Warsaw content to let that happen? Well, to discuss that now, I'm joined from the Polish capital by Wojciech Przybylski. He's editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight, a political magazine focusing on Central Europe. From Brussels is Lina Vosyliute, a research fellow in the Justice and Home Affairs Unit at the Center for European Policy Studies. And Pieter Cleppe is the head of the Brussels office of Open Europe and the editor-in-chief of Brussels.eu. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, in spite of journalists and NGOs actually being blocked from pretty long stretches of the border, some horribly distressing images are getting out. So now we have President Lukashenko saying people stranded at the border who no longer want to attempt crossing into Poland can return to Minsk and fly home. Wojciech, why do you think he's done that? Has he possibly realized this could turn into a serious human rights liability for him?
That is a consequence in part of the pressure that has been exerted in solidarity across EU on Belarus, threatening Belarus with additional sanctions, also having a common European effort to stop flights from flying to Minsk. And some of the countries like Iraq has been already declaring that they will arrange for safe returns of their nationals from this crisis, humanitarian crisis situation. So there are ways in which he is being pressured from many points. There are also escalating threats by Poland to limit the only source of revenue Belarus has contemporary, which is the railway connection, railway freight from Asia, from China to Poland. And I think some of that pressure might start to be working.
Interesting. Peter, do you see the same kind of political dynamic there?
Well, yeah, it looks that things are slightly improving. Some of the airlines that have been transporting people from the Middle East to Belarus have taken measures or restricting certain nationalities from going to Belarus. This follows EU threats to impose restrictions on these airlines to fly to EU territory if they do not tackle some of the EU's concerns here. It's still not over yet. Today we saw another standoff at the border. It's still questionable what will happen to people that refuse to voluntarily go back to places like Iraq. I suspect at the end perhaps the EU will need to take in some of them. But the most important thing is not so much how many people ultimately manage to get in. It is to make sure that this does not happen again. So for that, it's very important to take a very firm line on Belarus, I think.
Right, because I'm sorry, Lina, I'll come to you in just a second, but let me go back to Wojciech for a minute, because could it be seen as rewarding Lukashenko if these refugees and migrants are indeed allowed to cross into Poland? In his mind, he would have succeeded.
In his mind, he would have succeeded if they break the lines of the so-called green border, the border where there are no border crossing, and he creates an impression that there is uncontrolled flow of people to Poland. Poland is ready to accept asylum when people are crossing an official border, but Lukashenko is putting them in the forests where there are attempts to break the border. His attempts are not, he doesn't care for the people, he cares for those people. He cares for making damage and to be paid in order to stop this damage. That was the plan, also revealed earlier by his unofficial spokesman, Mr. Lavrov, who admittedly said this would be the solution Russia sees as a viable solution, that Belarus would be paid off by EU to stop this situation.
Interesting. Lina, let me ask you, more on the human rights front. Now that we do have Lukashenko apparently offering people to come back to Minsk when they were reportedly blocked before, and with Iraq also organizing repatriation flights, could we see more people, do you think most people actually, leave the border area now and at least not risk their lives by potentially freezing to death?
That's indeed one of the possible solutions, that people could either come back via Belarus. However, we know from the research how much people actually invest in those journeys, and sometimes it can be a lifetime savings. So the decision to turn back, it's not easily made. And indeed, from nationalities, we see that there are Syrians, Afghans, Iraqis, people who have high chances actually to ask for asylum and international protection in the safe countries such as EU declares to be. So here we have unresolved issue that actually at this moment there are no other possibilities than trying various irregular ways to come into EU, and unfortunately we see how third countries such as Belarus, but we earlier also saw Morocco, Turkey, Libya also could play their own geopolitical games by using this inability to arrive safely, orderly, and regularly.
Right. Peter, Poland is supposed to be obligated to follow EU laws, but for years now we've had no common immigration policy. Poland has been able to watch the Greeks push back migrants. Balkan states have done the same. So what incentive is left, really, for any country, not least Poland, Latvia, Lithuania right now, to take on what they see as a massive burden because they are supposed to be obligated under EU law? What incentive do they have not to break those laws if everyone else has in the years past?
Well, actually, the issue of pushbacks is less clear than some people claim it is. I mean, if somebody's coming from a safe country, then it's fine to push them back because they're in safety. Then the question is, when is a country safe? And of course, if you push people back to Libya, then it's, I guess, pretty clear that's not safe. If people voluntarily go to a place like Belarus with human smugglers, I mean, then you could come to a different conclusion. I think the fundamental problem here is that the EU's borders are not secure. That if you enter the European Union in an illegal way and you are being denied asylum, that there is a very low chance that you will ever have to go back. So I think that's the main challenge that will need to be solved. So then authoritarian countries at Europe's border, like Belarus, can no longer abuse this weakness. Now, for years, the EU has struggled with this. Now, finally, Denmark is trying a new route. Denmark has an opt-out on justice and home affairs. And this is to try to outsource asylum processing to places like Rwanda. I mean, it's very unrealistic that this will succeed, but I guess if it would be taken up by the whole of the European Union, then perhaps we could see that new approach being implemented into practice, and this would help destroy the business model of the human smugglers, like Australia has managed to do. But it also would be much more fair to asylum seekers. They would not have to pay these massive sums to human smugglers. It would not only be the strong that would manage to get in, and then the EU could decide like how many people they are democratically able to take in an orderly manner. But so far it's only Denmark exploring these routes. Other EU countries are wary, and of course it's a very ambitious new strategy, but I think that's sort of the long-term solution in order to keep Europe's borders safe. Because even if you have more border guards, let's not forget that most people simply overstay their visum in Europe. So more border guards will not really help with that.
Right. Wojciech, I could see you agreed with almost all of what Peter had to say there as you nodded your head. But let me go back really to the beginning of this, in that, here you have thousands of people amassing on a border, not just in Poland. We've seen this, since really 2015, when the migrant crisis really started in Europe. How difficult is it really to determine how many people do have legitimate asylum claims versus those who really don't? How much is it really a burden for these countries to take on if thousands of people are allowed to cross and they are left to determine who has the right to stay and who does not? Is it really just too much to ask of wealthy European countries to do that processing?
If we're asking this question in the context of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, then the question is whether this is being done in an orderly process through the regular border checks. And apparently, there is a way to do that in an orderly fashion, but this is not being exercised from the Belarusian side. And people are being crossed apparently through point checks on the Belarusian side, but then they're moved away from, they have been in the past, moved away from the official border crossing. That would be the way, but also now we see, as we see the pictures in just being displaced, a lot of the forces have been moved to the border to those immediate places where people migrating or smuggled through Belarus are amassed by servicemen from Belarus, and they are being induced to cross illegally. And the resources, also human resources of police forces, of the border guards, of paramilitary services working along the Polish military to secure the border, to contain the situation, now may not have enough capacity simply to process that, as the primary task is to secure the border. But in general, yes, Poland is capable of processing more asylum seekers. It is shameful when the Polish politicians are afraid of doing so, of admitting so. I would underline here that Poland is, I think, run for a number of years number one or at the top of the countries which are admitting, which are first place of registration for foreign nationals arriving to EU. The country is experiencing a massive inflow of people from all around the world. This is not only Ukraine or Belarus. This is from places as far as China or many places in Southeast Asia or India and so on. And nothing, there is nothing that we have been unable to accommodate them in any way. Now, this is clear. There needs to be a political will also to do that. But first and foremost comes here security, and after that, all the other considerations.
Okay. I mean, Lina, is that fair when they say first and foremost, we're taking our own security into consideration when actually a number of EU countries really do have the resources to do more of the processing, to take on more of the responsibility, and they're just not doing it. They'd rather just block their borders rather than allow people to come in and be processed and deport them if they don't actually have a claim.
I completely agree with your later statement. Indeed, we see that around the globe, 86% of asylum seekers and refugees are hosted in the developing countries, so the countries that are way poorer than the EU is. So therefore, we really need to ask ourselves sincerely, and EU member states, has EU shown the solidarity to come up with the internal solutions? Because part of the issue here is that when in 2015 EU didn't came up, or EU relocation quotas didn't worked out the way they were supposed to work, and some countries, for instance, Poland, not taking even single asylum seeker to be relocated from Italy and Greece. It has shown internal deficits of this solidarity and cooperation and so-called burden sharing. So it's too quick to think about offshoring solutions when internal solutions have not been sufficiently explored. And at CEPS, we did actually another study that Peter referred that offshoring could be a solution. However, we found that in no way it could be a solution. It violates EU's laws, and EU would not avoid its own responsibilities over what's happened towards refugees and asylum seekers when they are processed externally.
Right.
Yeah.
Peter, if you have a quick response, go ahead. If not, the clock is against us. I'd like to move on to another issue here, but go ahead, Peter.
Well, I think legally it's perfectly possible to organize safe shelter for people outside of the EU's territory. That does not mean that we should still not also welcome people inside the EU's territory. But I think the crisis of 2015-16 has shown that there are very clear democratic limits to letting people migrate to the EU.
Okay. Wojciech, I'm going to come back to you then because we need to look at this as well. As you know, the EU has just on Monday agreed to a legal basis now for new sanctions on Belarus. First of all, do you have any idea what they might be and how effective they could be? And then on the counter side to that, Lukashenko is saying that Minsk is going to retaliate against any new sanctions. Retaliate how? Any indication there?
The indication, because I haven't read in detail any statement what the sanction list would look like. First, the targeted areas are the exports and exports, imports, and also traffic across Belarus. Belarus is has over the crisis with that started in May really, or has been initiated in May by Belarus, and now became into brought so much attention around September. There is an ongoing traffic of cargo, cars, trains going through Belarus with merchandise products both ways. So once you have a general EU agreement to sanction that kind of traffic, that puts enormous pressure on Belarus, because it adds not only EU pressure, but all other commercial partners that have stakes in this situation. That includes, for instance, China, because China is exporting most of their goods exactly through that railroad that goes through Belarus. Poland, on the Polish border side, it accepts 90% of all traffic from China. So you can just imagine how potent tool EU has, should EU agree in some coordination, I believe, with external partners on that. But this is ultimately the strongest response.
Right.
What I expect is targeted sanctions mean specific companies still operating in Belarus, airlines, additional providers of services, of goods to those companies that have been taking part in the process, and we will see how effectively, how well targeted they are only when we see the complete list.
And quickly, I mean, how much does Belarus, in a sense, have its hands tied in what it says it can retaliate against? Because as we saw, it tried to threaten blocking gas supplies coming from Russia, and then Moscow jumped in and said, oh no, this is our contract, and you're not blocking the transport of our oil to our customers. Is Belarus perhaps not in as powerful a position as it would like to think, or is there another game at play with Moscow also being a bit suspicious in what it's saying to the public?
Mr. Lukashenko has been previously also bluffing a number of times, both in such standoffs with EU, but also with Russia, threatening alternatives that weren't real. In terms of oil, supplies of oil can be provided to EU also from other directions, though not most conveniently, but this is a possibility. Gas pipeline, the Yamal pipeline, has been dried by Gazprom, Russian decision over the last month, and basically it does not transport through Belarus to Germany and to Poland the gas that was otherwise contracted and promised, which is another dimension of this situation, but it's not really in the hands of Mr. Lukashenko to decide on that.
Right, and another angle is the threat of military escalation. Lukashenko said actually on Thursday, Pieter, that he had an agreement with Russia to have nuclear-capable bombers to patrol the western border. Meanwhile, Poland has asked for concrete steps to be taken from NATO. Is military escalation in the cards?
Sadly, I think that's a risk. I mean, what you could also see at the border last week is how Belarusian border guards were sort of shooting with semi-automatic weapons, seemingly trying to provoke the Polish police. Thankfully, that has not yet happened. So the Polish border forces seem to be very much under control. But I think it's a risk. It really looks like Lukashenko was looking for some escalation, hoping that this would somehow then benefit him. I think this is a grave misjudgment on his side. I mean, it's one thing to impose sanctions to try to punish Belarus for internal democratic deficiencies. It's another if you have the Belarusian regime basically violating the borders of a NATO member state by escorting a few thousand people to the border, trying to break through it. So I don't think Lukashenko should underestimate. I don't think he should underestimate how much resolve there is in the West.
And
counter these
some
kind of
also suspect
games.
that there might be a diversionary tactic here also being played by Russia in this whole scenario, completely in coordination with Lukashenko, that this all has been manufactured as a diversionary tactic to take attention away from Ukraine, where Russia has been perpetrating a serious military buildup on the border. Do you think that's too far of a stretch? Very quickly, Peter, or is that also possible?
I think it's pretty clear that Russia pulls the strings in Belarus, and it's also a fact that Russia is amassing these troops supposedly for exercises. So it's hard to see. It's hard not to see any connection.
Okay. Peter, we will have to leave it there. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists, Wojciech Przybylski, Lina Vosyliute, and Pieter Cleppe, of course. Thanks all so much for being with us, and to our viewers for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter @the_newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.